All right guys, I want to give you a quick look at my backyard lumber kiln. It's a dehumidification style lumber kiln. It's great if you have air dried lumber that you need to finish off down to 6 to 8% moisture content. We've got a bunch of white oak drying in here. Now the plans for the lumber kiln originally appeared in Woodworker's Journal, so we'll definitely link in the description box to the article so you can build one of these yourself if you want, but let's go in and check how the load's coming along. So the overall layout of the kiln, we've got stacks to the left and right with a walkway down between. And there's a household dehumidifier, a fairly large size dehumidifier to extract the moisture from the air. And then up above we have overhead fans, and they're in fan shroud boxes. We've got 4 of them there, as well as large foam baffles to direct the airflow down around the lumber in kind of a circular pattern. So the lumber is actually stacked very carefully, and you'll notice that the stickers are aligned with 4x4 cauls down on the floor, and that's just to transfer the weight evenly so that you wind up with flat lumber that doesn't dry with any warps or defects in it. In the kiln here we're using 1-inch square stickers, and that does a great job at providing adequate airflow to dry the lumber. Any crates or bins of extra lumber I have, I'll throw those on top for just a little dead weight. So these are the fan assemblies. They're actually attic fans that I built into shrouds, and the shroud is mounted to the ceiling by means of a Lazy Susan, and that just lets me rotate the fan halfway through the drying cycle to change the direction of the airflow. Heat lamps are controlled by a switch by the door of the kiln, and they let me add supplemental heat as needed. It is remarkable though how just the byproduct heat from the fans and dehumidifier keep the kiln at about 115 to 120 degrees even without the heat lamps. So unless the weather is really cold, the heat lamps are just for the end sterilization phase of the drying cycle. 1/2-inch iron pipe and some T-fittings help to support the baffles from the ceiling of the kiln. And the baffles themselves are just made from construction style foam. This is rigid foam in 1-inch thickness. It's not actually critical that they're foam. They just happen to be a good material that I could edge with plywood, and it makes for light baffles that are easy to maneuver and reposition in the kiln. Maybe you really want a kiln, but your spouse would rather have a sauna? Add a camping chair. You've got both. Okay, the basic controls to the kiln are here. A switch to shut off the heat lights, a switch to control the 4 fans, a main power shutoff to the entire shed for emergency purposes, and a little thermometer and gauge for your humidity level. It's nice because it also stores your highs and lows. Looks like in the last drying cycle our high was 138 degrees, and if you carry that on long enough, that's good enough to sterilize the lumber to prevent any bugs. So back at the bench, let's look at some accessories you'll need to run your kiln. Things like temperature and humidity sensors, moisture meters, and even a steam generator. We use the steam generator as the very last step in the process to reintroduce some moisture to the very dry outer layers of the lumber. Let's look at these in more detail. Now you'll want to have a good moisture meter to keep track of the drying process. This is kind of a basic version, but it is accurate. It's a pin style moisture meter, so by depressing the probes into the lumber, you actually get a sense for at least what the surface moisture content is. But the probes are only about 1/4 inch long, so that limits our ability to check the core moisture content. For that, you'll want a little more advanced moisture meter, one that can accept these external wires. The wires attach to probes that you'll actually screw into the center of the lumber. Make sure that the tip of that probe gets down deep, about the center of the thickness of whatever lumber you're drying, and make sure that these probes are inserted midway in the stack. So it really gives you a good representation of how you're doing through and through with your stack, not just the boards on top. And from that point, you'll be able to get a very good sense of what the core moisture content is and determine if you're ready to cease the drying cycle and move on to things like sterilization and the last step, which is introducing that steam. Here's a little specialty tool I use for working with the moisture probes. It acts as a wrench, so you can thread these into the lumber and get them to the right depth that you want. Also, if you're using a style probe that's not threaded, that's actually a press-in probe, it's kind of neat because you can use this pin and that goes through the probe and it'll help you just pull it out without too much fuss. So it's a nice little specialty tool for working with moisture probes. So here's the temperature stick sensor I use. This is approved for temperatures up to around 140 degrees, so it does just fine out in the kiln. It's battery operated, and that sends a signal by Wi-Fi to the cell phone, and it actually graphs for me the temperature and the humidity as I go through the drying cycle. So something like this, although not entirely necessary, is a really great feature to help you manage the kiln, especially if you're going to be off-site and you're worried about having the kiln running at temperature. And this will give you warnings if you want. I have a warning set up that if it's over 120 degrees, it will alert me by text message. And you can do all sorts of custom warnings depending on what your drying cycle is. My typical drying cycle, I will run about 110 to 120 degrees for most of the time until I get to the end. After your moisture meter shows that you're 6 to 8% in the core of your lumber, the final steps of the drying cycle are to really bring it up to high temperatures to sterilize the lumber. This will kill any bugs that might be present in the load, and you need to bring it up to 130 to 140 degrees for a couple of days. After that sterilization phase is complete, the last thing you want to do is reintroduce some moisture into the very dry outer layers of the lumber. And to do that, we'll use a steam bending kit. Now you could use a basic wallpaper steamer for this, but what we're going to use is a steam bending kit from a woodworking specialty supplier. Take this out to the kiln, plug it in. I usually clip the end of the hose to mid-rung of a ladder so that the steam can kind of spray around the kiln evenly, and run the kiln fans while you're doing this. This will reintroduce some moisture to the very dry outer layers of the lumber and equalize things between the outer and the core moisture content. If you do this simple step for even 3 to 4 hours, what you'll notice when you start bringing the lumber into your shop to work it, it'll be much more stable. All right guys, there's my little primer on how to run a lumber kiln in your backyard. Maybe you want to turn an existing shed into a lumber kiln, or do as I did and make a purpose-built ground-up shed for drying your own lumber. And it's really a pretty simple process as long as you know the steps and you take it all the way through the sterilization phase so you don't have trouble with bugs. And that final step of steaming the lumber really seems to make things more stable as well. So if you're willing to put in a little time, I guarantee you will save a lot of money on your lumber costs, even if you do just a modest amount of woodworking. I'm Willie Sandry, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one. That's good.